I never thought my father's funeral would be the day I learned how little I mattered. My name is Josie Brennan. I'm 51 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed that even though my life hadn't turned out the way I'd hoped, 2 failed marriages, no kids, a studio apartment above a laundromat in Billings, Montana, at least my father saw me. Really saw me. I was wrong. The day we buried him, my sisters Claire and Margaret stood across from me at the graveside, perfect and polished in their expensive clothes, surrounded by their perfect families. I stood alone, in a dress that smelled like the hospice where I work, holding myself together with sheer stubbornness. 4 days later, we sat in the attorney's office for the reading of the will. Claire and Margaret got everything. The family business Dad built from nothing, the beautiful lake house, the investment portfolio worth over $1 million, the savings accounts, the stocks, the life insurance, everything that mattered. And me? I got a cabin, an old, rotting shack at the top of the crazy mountains that I'd never even seen. A place so remote it didn't have electricity or running water. A structure so damaged it looked like it might collapse in the next strong wind. Claire actually laughed, right there in the lawyer's office. Enjoy your shack, Josie. I drove out of that office with my hands shaking and my throat tight, and I made a decision. I had to see it. I had to see this final insult, this last piece of evidence that I'd always been the least loved, the least valued, the least worthy. So I drove alone into the mountains on a cold October morning, up a barely passable dirt road that wound through dense forest for 2 hours, until I reached a clearing where the cabin sat like a corpse, roof sagging, windows broken, porch leaning dangerously to one side. It was worse than I'd imagined. Inside, everything was rotting. Mouse droppings covered the floor. The air smelled of mildew and abandonment. This was what my father thought I deserved. I should have left, but I'm stubborn. So I started cleaning. And that's when I found it. A loose floorboard in the kitchen, near the old cast iron stove. Underneath was a steel handle bolted into a hidden plate. I pulled, and a trapdoor opened, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. At the bottom was a concrete bunker, small, dry, lit by a single battery-powered lamp. And along one wall sat 6 metal lockboxes, each one labeled with my name in my father's handwriting. Inside the first box, gold coins. Dozens of them, worth thousands. Inside the second, bundles of cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Inside the third, land deeds, properties across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, hundreds of acres, mineral rights, water rights. Inside the fourth, stock certificates and account numbers. Millions of dollars in hidden investments. Inside the fifth, photographs of me. My entire life documented in pictures I didn't know existed. Me as a child, me at nursing school, me at my weddings, me alone at Christmas. Pictures that meant he'd been watching, caring, remembering. Inside the 6th box, a letter. I sat on that cold concrete floor and read it, and with every word my entire world shattered and rebuilt itself. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd chosen me. He'd given my sisters the easy inheritance, the business, the house, the visible wealth. But he'd given me something they could never touch, something hidden. Something that required me to find it, to prove I was strong enough, stubborn enough, worthy enough. He'd given me everything that truly mattered. And he'd trusted me, only me, to know what to do with it. But the letter also revealed something else. A confession. My father had made deals years ago. Land acquisitions that weren't entirely clean, partnerships with dangerous men, compromises that had haunted him, and some of those men were still out there, still waiting, still owed. That night, as I sat alone in the cabin trying to process everything, I heard footsteps on the porch, 3 sharp knocks on the door. "I know you're in there." A man's voice, rough and low. "I saw your car. Who are you?" "My name's Ray Coulter. I was a friend of your father's, and we need to talk about what he owed me." I stood frozen as he continued. "Your father made promises before he died. Promises about this land, about old debts, about making things right. Now you own everything, and those promises are yours. Are you going to honor them, or are we going to have a problem?" I didn't answer. I heard him walk away, heard his truck start and drive off into the darkness. And I realized something terrifying. My inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a test, a burden, a responsibility I never asked for but couldn't escape. I climbed back down into the bunker and reread my father's letter, focusing on one line. Some of those properties came from men who didn't care where the money came from or who got hurt. My father had left me a fortune, but he'd also left me his sins. Now I had to decide, do I keep the money and run? Do I tell my sisters the truth and split everything equally? Or do I stay and face whatever my father left behind? The debts, the secrets, the dangerous men who think I owe them. Every choice could save me or destroy me. And somewhere in the darkness of those mountains, Ray Coulter was waiting to see what kind of woman I really was. My father believed I was strong enough for this. I'm about to find out if he was right. I should have known something was wrong when Claire showed up to the funeral in white. Not cream, not ivory, pure white, like she was the bride at some morbid wedding. She stood at the edge of Dad's grave in her tailored coat and designer heels, sunglasses hiding whatever she might have been feeling, while Margaret clutched her husband's arm and dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I stood alone on the other side, in my old black dress that smelled faintly of the hospital, hands shoved deep in my pockets because I'd forgotten gloves. The priest's words washed over me like rain. I barely heard them. Something about eternal rest, about God's mercy, about a life well lived. Father Sullivan had known Dad for 40 years, but even he seemed to be reading from a script. Dad hadn't been to Mass in a decade, not since Mom died. He'd stopped believing in comfort, I think. Stopped believing in easy answers. I understood that. The cemetery was on a hill overlooking Billings, Montana, brown plains stretching forever under a gray October sky. Wind cut through the scattered mourners, maybe 30 people total. Employees from the hardware store, a few old hunting buddies, the mayor who gave a short speech about Dad's contributions to the community. Claire's kids stood fidgeting in their church clothes, bored and cold. Margaret's husband checked his phone twice. When they lowered the casket, I felt nothing, just a hollow ache, like I'd already done my grieving years ago and this was just paperwork. Afterward, at the reception in the church basement, I stood by the coffee urn and watched my sisters work the room like politicians. Claire had always been good at that, smiling, touching arms, saying exactly the right thing. Margaret was more businesslike, but just as smooth. They moved through the crowd like they owned it. I poured myself a third cup of coffee I didn't want and tried to look occupied. Josie. I turned. Claire stood beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive and floral that probably cost more than my rent. We're meeting with Dad's attorney on Thursday, she said, her voice low and brisk. 10 a.m. in Bozeman. You'll be there? I have a shift. Josie. She removed her sunglasses, and her eyes were sharp. It's the will reading. You need to be there. I nodded. Okay. She studied me for a moment, something like pity crossing her face. Then she touched my shoulder, brief, perfunctory, and walked away. I left early. No one noticed. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes. I lived above Jerry's laundromat on the south side of Billings, in a studio with thin walls and a window that overlooked the parking lot. It wasn't much, just a bed, a kitchenette, a bathroom the size of a closet. But it was mine. Or at least, I paid for it. I kicked off my shoes, peeled off the dress, and stood in my underwear staring at the unmade bed. The apartment was cold. The radiator clanked but never really worked. I should have turned on a lamp, made tea, done something to make the space feel less like a waiting room. Instead, I just stood there feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor at the hospice. Sorry about your dad. Take the week if you need it. I didn't respond. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a photograph, the only one I'd kept. Me and Dad, maybe 15 years ago, standing in front of his hardware store. He had his arm around my shoulders, and we were both smiling. I couldn't remember who took the picture. Probably Mom before she got sick. I stared at his face, weathered, serious, but with a softness around the eyes that he never showed in public. He'd been a hard man, Dad. Didn't talk much. Didn't show affection easily. But he'd been steady, reliable. And when Mom died, he'd held me at the funeral and whispered, "You're strong, Josie. Stronger than you know." I'd believed him then. I wasn't sure I believed him anymore. Thursday came too fast. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did, and made the 2-hour drive to Bozeman in my old Subaru. The car rattled and wheezed on the interstate, and I kept the radio off, driving in silence through the wide Montana landscape. The sky was enormous out here, pale and endless, and the mountains rose in the distance like the bones of the earth pushing through. Bozeman was one of those small cities that had grown too fast, chain stores and boutique coffee shops crowding out the old brick buildings downtown. Claire lived here in one of the new developments on the north side, where every house looked the same, and every lawn was perfect. I parked in front of the attorney's office, a modest building on Main Street with a bronze plaque by the door. Harrison and Associates, Estate Law. My hands were sweating. I wiped them on my jeans and went inside. The waiting room was all polished wood and leather chairs. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. A receptionist with a kind smile told me to take a seat, that Mr. Harrison would be with us shortly. Claire and Margaret were already there. Claire sat with her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone, looking like she was waiting for a spa appointment. Margaret had a leather portfolio open on her lap and was making notes with the expensive pen. Neither of them looked up when I walked in. I sat in the chair farthest from them and stared at a painting on the wall, some generic landscape of mountains and trees. "Josie," Margaret said after a moment, not looking up. "You look tired." "I'm fine. You should take better care of yourself." I didn't respond. The door to the inner office opened and a man in his 60s stepped out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that fit too well to be off the rack. He smiled warmly and gestured for us to follow. "Ladies, thank you for coming. I'm Robert Harrison. Please come in." His office was bigger than my apartment. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, windows overlooking Main Street. He gestured to 3 chairs arranged in front of the desk, and we sat like schoolchildren called to the principal's office. Harrison settled into his chair and folded his hands. "First, let me offer my condolences. Your father was a good man and a valued client. I had the privilege of knowing him for over 30 years. Claire nodded graciously. Margaret murmured something polite. I just sat there. Harrison opened a folder and adjusted his reading glasses. Now, Joseph Brennan's will is straightforward in most respects, but there are a few specific bequests I need to walk you through. I'll read the relevant sections, and then we can discuss any questions." He cleared his throat and began. "To my daughters, Claire Brennan Hutchins and Margaret Brennan Steele, I leave the following in equal shares. Full ownership of Brennan Hardware and Supply, including all assets, inventory, properties, and associated accounts. The family home located at 482 Lakeshore Drive, Hebgen Lake, Montana. My investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $1. $2 million held with Fidelity Investments. And my personal savings, currently totaling $340,000, held in joint account at First National Bank of Montana." Margaret was already making notes. Claire smiled slightly, satisfied. I felt my chest tighten. Harrison continued. "To my daughter, Josephine Marie Brennan, I leave the following. Sole ownership of the property located at Trails End Road, Crazy Mountains, Montana, including the cabin and all structures thereon, as well as the surrounding 40 acres. Silence. Then Claire laughed, a short, sharp sound. "The cabin? That old wreck?" Harrison glanced at her over his glasses but didn't respond. Margaret frowned. "I didn't even know Dad still owned that place. Is it worth anything?" "The land itself has some value," Harrison said carefully, "though it's quite remote. No utilities, difficult access." "So basically nothing," Claire said, looking at me now with something between amusement and pity. "Dad left you a shack in the woods." I couldn't breathe. My hands were clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would he—" Harrison's expression softened. "Your father didn't explain his reasoning to me, Josie, but he was very specific about this. He wanted you to have the property. He even made a note here." He tapped the document. "That you were not to sell it for at least 1 year." "A year?" Margaret shook her head. "That's ridiculous. If she wants to sell it, she should be able to." "It's a condition of the bequest," Harrison said firmly. "If Josie sells the property within 12 months, ownership reverts to a land conservation trust. She would receive nothing." Claire leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Well, I guess you're stuck with it, Josie." I stood up. The room tilted slightly, but I steadied myself. "Is that everything?" Harrison looked concerned. "There are a few more administrative details, but nothing that requires your immediate— I need to go." I walked out before anyone could stop me. Behind me, I heard Margaret say something, her voice tight with irritation, but I didn't care. I pushed through the waiting room, past the receptionist's worried glance, and out into the cold October air. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. A cabin, 40 acres of nothing. That's what I was worth to him. My sisters got the business, the house, the money, everything that mattered. I got abandoned. I should have driven home. Back to Billings, back to my small life, back to work and routines and the safe, numb rhythm of survival. But I didn't. Instead, I stopped at a gas station, filled the tank, bought a bag of trail mix and a bottle of water, and pulled up the GPS coordinates Harrison had given me for the property. Trails End Road. Crazy mountains. 2 hours northeast, deep into wilderness. I started driving. The highway gave way to county roads, which gave way to gravel, which eventually became little more than dirt ruts winding through dense pine forest. My Subaru complained with every bump and rock, but I kept going. The trees closed in overhead, blocking out the sky. The temperature dropped. I passed no other cars, no houses, no signs of human life. Just trees, mountains, silence. The road climbed steadily, switchbacking up the mountainside. My ears popped. The aspens were burning gold and orange, their leaves shimmering in the thin sunlight that filtered through the canopy. It was beautiful in a lonely, indifferent way, the kind of beauty that doesn't care if you're there to see it or not. After nearly an hour on the dirt road, I rounded a bend and saw it. The cabin. I stopped the car and just stared. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, maybe 50 yards off the road. The logs were dark with age and weather, the chinking crumbling in places. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing in patches. 2 windows on the front were cracked, one boarded over with plywood. The porch tilted to one side, and the steps looked like they might collapse under weight. It was worse than I'd imagined. I got out slowly, my boots crunching on the pine needles and fallen leaves. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of resin and earth. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the faint rush of water. A stream, maybe. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the hinges screamed. Inside, the cabin was a tomb. Dust hung in the air, visible in the slanted light from the broken windows. The floor was warped and stained, littered with debris. Old newspapers, broken glass, animal droppings. There was a small main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove and a rusted sink, and 2 small bedrooms off to the side. The furniture, what was left of it, was rotting and mouse-chewed. I walked through slowly, my footsteps echoing. In one bedroom, I found an old metal bed frame and a single chair. In the other, nothing but water damage and mold. The bathroom was a disaster. No running water, the toilet cracked and stained. I stood in the middle of the main room and felt something crack open inside me. This was it. This was my inheritance. My father's final judgment. You're worth this, Josie. A wreck, something broken and forgotten. I sank down onto the filthy floor, back against the wall, and finally, I let myself cry. Not quiet tears, not dignified grief. I sobbed. Great, shaking sobs that tore out of my chest and echoed in the empty cabin. I cried for my father, who'd never said he loved me. I cried for my mother, who'd been gone 10 years and left a hole nothing could fill. I cried for my failed marriages, my empty apartment, my small gray life. I cried for the girl I used to be, who'd believed she mattered, who'd thought she could be something. And when the tears finally stopped, I sat in the silence and felt nothing. Just cold. Just tired. I should leave, I thought. Drive back down the mountain, sell the property as soon as the year was up, take whatever money I could get, and move on. But I didn't move. Instead, I stood up, wiped my face with my sleeve, and looked around. There was an old broom leaning in the corner by the kitchen. I picked it up. If I was stuck here, if this was all I had, then I'd at least make it bearable. I started sweeping. The floor was a mess. Decades of dirt, leaves, broken glass. I worked slowly, methodically, pushing the debris toward the door. My arms ached, my back hurt, but I kept going. Near the cast iron stove, I felt the broom catch on something. I looked down. One of the floorboards was loose. I knelt and ran my fingers along the edge. The board shifted under my touch, not nailed down properly. I pried it up with my fingernails, and beneath it, a handle. Heavy iron, bolted into a steel plate. My breath caught. I grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled. The trapdoor opened with a groan of old hinges, revealing a dark square opening and the top rungs of a wooden ladder descending into blackness. I stared down into the dark, my heart pounding. And somewhere deep in that darkness, I heard a sound. A click. And then, light. Faint, cold, fluorescent light spilling up from below. I climbed down. The ladder was solid, Old wood, but well-maintained, each rung smooth under my hands. I climbed down slowly, my phone flashlight cutting through the darkness below, though I barely needed it. The fluorescent light I'd heard click on grew brighter as I descended. 12 rungs down, my feet hit concrete. I was standing in a bunker. The space was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, with smooth concrete walls and a poured floor. The air was cool and dry, almost pleasant after the musty rot of the cabin above. A single battery-powered fluorescent lamp hung from the ceiling, casting everything in cold, white light. Along one wall was a metal shelving unit, and on it sat 6 identical lockboxes, each about the size of a tackle box, made of brushed steel with combination locks. Each box had a label, written in Dad's careful block letters, Josie. My hands were shaking as I reached for the first one. The combination lock was a simple 3-digit wheel. I tried my birthday, nothing. Mom's birthday, nothing. Then, almost without thinking, I tried 747, July 4th, 1776. Dad's favorite number combination. He used to say it was the only date that mattered. The lock clicked open. Inside were gold coins, dozens of them, stacked neatly in felt-lined trays. American eagles, Krugerrands, Canadian maples. I picked one up. It was heavy and cold, stamped with an eagle and the words, 1 ounce fine gold. I'd seen these before, in estate sales and pawn shops, each one worth maybe $1,500. There had to be at least 50 coins in this box alone. I set it aside and opened the second box. Same combination. Bundles of cash. $100 bills, wrapped tight in plastic with rubber bands, stacked like bricks. I pulled one out and counted, $10,000 in a single bundle. There were at least 20 bundles. My heart was pounding now. The third box, land deeds. Thick sheaves of legal paper, each one stamped and notarized. I scanned the headers, properties in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, hundreds of acres, mineral rights, water rights. Some of the deeds were decades old, the paper yellowed and brittle. The fourth box, stock certificates and account numbers, pages and pages of them, handwritten notes in the margins. Companies I recognized, Microsoft, Apple, Berkshire Hathaway, and some I didn't. Investment accounts with 8-figure balances scrawled in pencil. The fifth box, photographs. This one hit me harder than the gold. Pictures of me. Me as a little girl standing in front of the hardware store. Me at my high school graduation, smiling awkwardly in my cap and gown. Me at nursing school, exhausted and proud. Me at my first wedding, young, hopeful, stupid. Me at my second wedding, older and more careful. Me alone at Christmas, sitting at a diner counter with a cup of coffee. Pictures I didn't know existed. Pictures he'd kept. Pictures that meant he'd been watching, paying attention, caring, in his silent, distant way. I pressed my hand to my mouth, eyes burning. The sixth box was different, lighter. When I opened it, there was only one thing inside. A sealed envelope, thick with paper, addressed in his handwriting. Josie. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, back against the wall, and opened it. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten, dated 2 months before he died. I read, Josie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you made it this far, it means you didn't give up. That's why I chose you. Your sisters are good women, but they live for comfort, for appearances, for what other people think. They always have. I gave them what they wanted. The business, the house, the easy wealth. They'll be fine. They'll fight over it, divide it, spend it, and forget me. But you, Josie, you're different. You've lived with less and never complained. You've carried burdens no one else wanted to carry. You've failed, yes, but you've also gotten back up. You know what it means to lose everything and still keep going. That's the kind of strength that matters. That's the kind of heart I trust. Everything in this bunker is yours. The gold, the land, the money, it's all yours. I didn't put it in the will because I didn't want your sisters to know. I didn't want lawyers and taxes and fights. I wanted you to have something they couldn't touch. Something that could give you a second chance. This cabin was where I came when I needed to think, to pray, to remember what mattered. I built it with my own hands when I was 25, before I had money or success or any of the things I thought would make me happy. Your mother and I spent our first anniversary here. She loved it. After she died, I couldn't come back for a long time. But in the last few years, I came up here when things got too heavy, when I needed to be quiet. I'm not a perfect man, Josie. I made mistakes. I was hard on you girls. I didn't say the things I should have said. I let your mother carry too much. I worked too hard and loved too carefully. But I want you to know something. I see you. I've always seen you. You have your mother's heart. Generous, patient, stronger than you know. You've spent your whole life taking care of people who were dying, holding their hands, giving them comfort. That's holy work, Josie. Don't let anyone tell you different. Now it's your turn to be taken care of. Don't waste this. Don't hide. Don't shrink. Take what I've given you and build something. Something true. Something that lasts. Be the woman I always knew you could be. One more thing. There's a reason I kept all this hidden. Years ago, I made some choices I'm not proud of. I took shortcuts. I did business with people I shouldn't have trusted. Some of the land in that box came from deals that weren't entirely clean. I'm not saying I stole, nothing like that. But I bent rules. I looked the other way when I should have asked questions. I built my success on compromises, and it's haunted me. The money in this bunker is clean. I earned it, saved it, invested it carefully. But some of those land deeds, some of those properties, came from men who didn't care where the money came from or who got hurt. I justified it at the time. I told myself I was providing for my family, but I knew better. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to make the same mistakes. You have a chance now, a real chance to do something good with all this. Don't just spend it. Don't just hide it. Use it to help people. Use it to build something that matters. That's the only way I'll rest easy. Your father, Joseph Brennan, P.S. The combination to all the locks is 747. Same as always. Some things don't change. I read the letter 3 times, sitting alone in that cold concrete bunker, and with every word, I felt the weight of it settle deeper into my chest. He'd seen me. He'd trusted me. He'd left me everything that mattered. Not the business, not the house, but this. Freedom. A second chance. A way out. And a burden. Because he'd also left me his guilt, his compromises, his unfinished business. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I stood up and looked around at the boxes, at the gold and the cash and the deeds, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Or maybe just terror. Because now I had to decide what to do with all of this. And every choice I made would mean something. I climbed back up the ladder, sealed the trapdoor, and replaced the floorboard. Then I walked out onto the sagging porch and looked out at the forest, at the golden aspens and the dark pines and the endless sky. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of rose and violet. I pulled out my phone. 1 bar of signal, barely. I dialed Claire's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "Josie, where are you?" "I'm at the cabin." A pause. Then carefully, "Why?" I wanted to see it. And it's exactly what you said. A wreck. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "I'm sorry, Josie. I really am. If you want, Margaret and I can help you list it. Get you whatever we can for the land." "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to keep it." Silence. "Keep it?" "Josie, there's nothing there. It's falling apart. You can't even live in it." "I'll fix it." "With what money?" Her voice was sharper now, irritation creeping in. "Josie, be realistic. You work as a nurse. You can barely afford rent. How are you going to renovate a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" "I'll figure it out." Another pause. Then colder. "Fine. Do what you want, but don't come crying to us when you realize it's a mistake." She hung up. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the mountains, and felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to please anyone. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't making myself smaller to fit into someone else's expectations. I was just standing here, alone, free, and terrified. I spent the night in the cabin. It was a mistake. I knew it even as I was unrolling the sleeping bag I'd found in the Subaru's trunk and laying it out on the cleanest section of floor I could find. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, and the cabin had no heat, no insulation, just the cold mountain air seeping through every crack. I could hear animals moving outside, rustling, scratching, the occasional distant howl that might have been a coyote or just the wind. I lay in my sleeping bag, fully clothed, shivering, staring at the ceiling. And I thought about everything. About my father, who'd loved me in his own broken, silent way. About my sisters, who'd never understand. About the money hidden beneath my feet, enough to change my life or ruin it. About the choices I had to make. I could take the money and disappear, Move somewhere warm, somewhere anonymous, and live quietly. No one would ever know. Or I could stay. Fix the cabin. Use the money carefully, wisely, the way Dad wanted. Or I could tell the truth. Tell Claire and Margaret about the bunker, split everything evenly, and let the lawyers sort it out. Each option felt impossible. Somewhere around midnight, I heard it. A sound outside. Not an animal. Footsteps. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. The creak of old wood under weight. Then a knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Another knock. Harder this time. "I know you're in there." A man's voice, rough and low. "I saw your car." I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. Not even one bar now. The doorknob rattled. "Open the door, Miss Brennan. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." My throat was dry. "Who are you?" "My name's Ray Coulter. I was a friend of your father's. I need to talk to you about this property. It's the middle of the night. I know, I'm sorry. But this can't wait." I stood slowly, my legs shaking, and moved toward the door. I didn't open it. "What do you want?" "Your father made some promises. Promises he didn't keep before he died. Now you own this land, and I need to know. Are you going to honor those promises?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." His voice was harder now. "Or you will soon enough. This land isn't just yours, Miss Brennan. Your father owed people. He made deals. And now those debts are yours." "I don't owe anyone anything." "That's where you're wrong." I heard him step back from the door. Then his footsteps moving away, back across the porch, down into the clearing. I ran to the window and looked out. In the moonlight, I saw a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat, walking toward a truck parked at the edge of the trees. He climbed in, started the engine, and drove away, headlights cutting through the dark. I stood at the window for a long time, shaking, watching the road until I was sure he was gone. Then I went back to the trapdoor, pulled it open, and climbed down into the bunker. I sat on the floor and reread my father's letter by the fluorescent light, focusing on one line in particular. Some of those properties came from men who didn't care where the money came from or who got hurt. My father had left me more than money. He'd left me secrets. And now someone knew I was here. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the bunker until dawn, sitting with my back against the cold concrete wall, reading and rereading my father's letter, trying to decode what he'd meant. Deals that weren't entirely clean. Men who didn't care where the money came from. What had he done? What had he promised? And who was Ray Coulter? When the first gray light filtered down through the trapdoor, I climbed back up into the cabin. My body ached from the cold and the hard floor. My mind felt scraped raw. I boiled water on a camp stove I'd found in the Subaru and made instant coffee that tasted like dirt, but I drank it anyway, standing at the broken window and watching the forest wake up. I had decisions to make. I could run, pack up, leave, pretend none of this ever happened, let the property sit for a year and then sell it, take what I could get, and disappear. Or I could stay, face whatever my father had left behind, finish what he'd started, or fix what he'd broken. The smart choice was obvious, but I'd spent 51 years making the smart choice, the safe choice, the small choice. And where had it gotten me? A studio above a laundromat, and a life so quiet I could disappear for a week and no one would notice. I set down my coffee cup and made a decision. I was staying. Over the next 3 days, I turned the cabin into something almost livable. I drove into the nearest town, a place called Melville, population 800, an hour down the mountain, and bought supplies. Cleaning products, a space heater, batteries, tarps, duct tape, a toolbox. I used cash from the bunker, just a few $100s, and the clerk at the hardware store, a kid maybe 20 years old with a scraggly beard, didn't ask any questions. Back at the cabin, I worked. I scrubbed the floors, patched the worst of the roof leaks with tarps and duct tape, boarded up the broken windows properly. I hauled out decades of garbage, rotted furniture, animal nests, broken glass. I found a hand pump for the well behind the cabin and managed to get it working, so at least I had cold water. It wasn't much, but it was something. At night, I sat by the fireplace. I'd gotten it working after clearing out the chimney, and wrote lists. Lists of what needed to be done. Lists of questions I needed answered. Lists of people I needed to find. And at the top of every list, Ray Coulter. On the fourth day, I drove back into Melville and found the town's only diner. A small place called Rosie's, with red vinyl booths and a counter that looked like it hadn't changed since 1975. I ordered coffee and pancakes and asked the waitress, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a bun, if she knew anyone named Ray Coulter. She stiffened, just slightly, but I saw it. Why are you asking? He came to see me, up at my father's cabin. I want to know who he is. She set down the coffee pot and studied me. You're Joe Brennan's daughter. Yes. She nodded slowly. Ray Coulter's a timber contractor. Works out of Great Falls mostly, but he's got stakes in land all over this part of Montana. He and your father had business together, years ago. What kind of business? She hesitated. Then quietly, the kind you don't talk about in public. I leaned forward. Please. I need to know. She glanced around the diner. It was empty except for one old man in the corner reading a newspaper, then sat down across from me. Your father was a good man, she said carefully, but he made some deals when he was younger. Back in the 80s, 90s, timber rights, mineral rights, water access. Montana was different then, wild. People made money fast if they knew the right people and didn't ask too many questions. And Ray Coulter was one of those people. Ray was the middleman. He connected buyers and sellers, landowners who needed cash fast, developers who didn't care how they got the land. Your father bought properties through Ray. Some of them weren't exactly clean sales. What does that mean? It means some of the original owners didn't know what they were signing, or they were pressured, or the paperwork was creative. She looked at me steadily. I'm not saying your father did anything illegal, but he didn't ask questions when he should have. My stomach twisted. Why would Ray come to me now? Because some of those deals are coming back around. People are contesting old land claims. Families want their property back. And if your father promised Ray he'd help settle things before he died, then Ray thinks I owe him. She nodded. That's my guess. I sat back, my pancakes untouched. What should I do? That depends. How much do you care about your father's reputation? I don't know, I said honestly. I barely knew him. She stood up, picking up the coffee pot. Then you've got a choice to make. You can walk away, let the lawyers fight it out, and pretend none of this is your problem. Or you can do what your father couldn't. Make it right. She walked away, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and the weight of her words. I found Ray Coulter 3 days later. It wasn't hard. I asked around in Melville, and everyone knew him. He had an office, if you could call it that, in a double-wide trailer on the outskirts of town, with a sign out front that read, Coulter Land and Timber. I parked the Subaru and walked up to the door. It was open. Inside, the trailer was cramped and messy. File boxes stacked everywhere, a desk covered in paperwork, a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Ray sat behind the desk, a big man in his 60s with gray hair and a weathered face, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked up when I walked in, and his expression didn't change, like he'd been expecting me. Miss Brennan, Mr. Coulter. Sit down. I sat in the metal folding chair across from his desk. My hands were shaking, but I kept them in my lap where he couldn't see. You scared me the other night, I said. That wasn't my intention. Then what was? He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Your father and I did business for 30 years. Good business, mostly. We made money. We helped people. But toward the end, he got sloppy. Started having a conscience. Wanted to go back and fix old mistakes. What mistakes? Land deals. Properties we acquired that maybe weren't acquired the right way. Your father promised me he'd help settle things before he passed. He promised he'd make sure the families got what they were owed, but he died before he could finish. And now you think I should finish it. I think you inherited more than just land, Miss Brennan. You inherited responsibility. I felt anger rise in my chest. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't make those deals. Why should I pay for his mistakes? Because it's the right thing to do. According to who? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. According to the families who got cheated? According to the people your father promised to help? According to your own conscience, if you've got one. I stood up. I need time. How much time? I don't know, a week, maybe more. He nodded. I can give you 2 weeks, but after that, I'm filing contested claims on every property in your father's name. And trust me, Miss Brennan, that'll get messy. Lawyers, courts, newspapers, everyone will know what your father did. Is that what you want? I didn't answer. I just walked out. That night, I sat in the cabin and went through the land deeds one by one. There were 11 properties. Some were in Montana, some in Wyoming, one in Colorado. Hundreds of acres total. Some had mineral rights, some had water rights, some were just raw land. I cross-referenced them with county records I'd printed at the Melville Library, and slowly, the picture became clear. Most of the properties had been purchased in the late 80s and early 90s, during a time when land prices were low and regulations were loose. Many of the original owners were ranchers or farmers who'd fallen on hard times. The sales were legal, technically, but the terms were exploitative. Low prices, fast closings, families who didn't fully understand what they were signing away. My father had bought these properties through Ray Coulter. He'd held on to them for decades, watching their value increase. And now they were mine. I found a legal pad and started making notes. I calculated the current value of each property. Then I researched the original families, who they were, where they were now, whether they were still alive. It took me 3 days. By the end, I had a plan. I called Ray Coulter and asked him to set up a meeting with the families. He was surprised, but he agreed. A week later, I sat in the community room of Melville's public library, across from 4 families. Some were descendants of the original owners, children, grandchildren. Some were elderly, the people who'd actually signed the deeds decades ago. All of them looked at me with suspicion and barely concealed anger. I didn't blame them. I'd brought copies of all the deeds, all the records, all my notes. I'd also brought a lawyer, a woman from Bozeman named Patricia Reeves, who specialized in land disputes and estate law. She'd agreed to work with me after I explained what I was trying to do. I stood up and faced them. My name is Josie Brennan. Most of you knew my father, Joseph Brennan. I'm here because he made you a promise before he died and he didn't keep it. Now it's my responsibility to keep it for him. One of the men, older, maybe 70, with a weathered face and calloused hands, spoke up. Your father stole our land. He bought it legally, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean it was fair. I've reviewed all the records. And I agree with you. The terms of those sales were exploitative. You were taken advantage of. Murmurs around the room. Ray Coulter stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. I continued. I can't give you back the land, not all of it. But I can do something else. I'm offering to sell you back portions of the properties at the original sale price, adjusted for inflation. And for those of you who don't want to buy it back, I'm offering a cash settlement, the difference between what you were paid and what the land was actually worth. Silence. Then the old man spoke again. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. Your father didn't think so. My father carried guilt over this for years. He wanted to fix it, but he ran out of time. I have time, and I have the resources, so I'm fixing it. Patricia stepped forward and began explaining the details, the legal process, the timelines, the options. The families listened, skeptical but attentive. It took 2 more meetings over the next month to work out all the details. Some families wanted their land back. Others wanted cash. One family wanted neither. They just wanted an apology. I gave them all 3. By the end of November, it was done. The properties were transferred, the settlements paid, the lawyers satisfied. It cost me nearly half of what was in the bunker. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and gold, most of the high-value land deeds. But when it was finished, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clean. Claire called me in early December. What the hell are you doing, Josie? I was sitting on the newly repaired porch of the cabin, wrapped in a blanket, watching snow fall through the pines. What do you mean? Margaret got a call from some attorney in Bozeman. Something about land settlements and Dad's estate. What's going on? I took a breath. Dad left me more than just the cabin. Silence. Then, what are you talking about? I told her. Not everything. Not about the bunker, not about the exact amounts, but enough. About the properties, the old deals, the families Dad had wronged, about the settlements I'd paid. When I finished, Claire's voice was tight. You're telling me Dad had hidden assets and you just gave them away? I made things right. You bankrupted yourself for strangers. Josie, that money was yours. I could have kept it and lived with the guilt, just like Dad did. This is insane. Margaret and I should have been consulted. It wasn't your inheritance. It was mine, and I did what I thought was right. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence of the snow. Christmas came. I spent it alone in the cabin. I'd fixed it up over the past 2 months, repaired the roof properly, installed a wood stove, insulated the walls, replaced the windows. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and solid and mine. I made a small dinner, chicken, potatoes, green beans, and ate by candlelight at the old wooden table I'd restored. I thought about my father, about the Christmases we'd had when I was young, when Mom was still alive and the family felt whole. I thought about Claire and Margaret, who hadn't called. I thought about the families I'd helped, and the ones I hadn't been able to find. And I thought about the future, the one I was building here, slowly, carefully, with my own hands. After dinner, I walked outside into the snow. The sky was clear and the stars were impossibly bright, the kind of brightness you only get in the mountains, far from city lights. The air was cold and sharp, and my breath came out in clouds. I stood in the clearing and looked up at the sky, and I said a prayer. Not a formal one, not something from a book, just words from my heart. Thank you for this. Thank you for the chance. Help me be worthy of it. Help me do better. Help me be strong. The wind moved through the pines, and somewhere far off, I heard the call of an owl. I went back inside, fed the fire, and fell asleep in my own bed, in my own home, for the first time in my life feeling like I belonged somewhere. Spring came slowly to the mountains. By April, the snow had melted and the forest was coming alive. Wildflowers in the meadows, birds returning, the stream behind the cabin running fast and clear with snowmelt. I'd spent the winter working, not just on the cabin, but on myself. I read books on land management, on conservation, on sustainable development. I contacted environmental groups and asked questions. I learned about easements, about protecting wilderness, about giving land back to the earth instead of exploiting it. And I made a plan. The properties I still owned, the ones I hadn't sold back to the families, I was going to donate to a land trust. They'd be protected forever, kept wild, kept free. It's what Mom would have wanted. It's what Dad should have done. In May, Ray Coulter came to see me one last time. He walked up to the cabin. I saw him coming from the window, and I met him on the porch. Miss Brennan. Mr. Coulter. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. He glanced around at the cabin, at the repairs, at the garden I'd started planting in the clearing. You've done good work here. Thank you. I wanted to apologize for how I approached you that first night. I was pushy, aggressive. It wasn't right. You were protecting people, I understand. He nodded. Your father was a complicated man, but in the end he tried to do the right thing. And so did you. I'm still trying. That's all any of us can do. He held out his hand, and I shook it. Then he walked back to his truck and drove away, and I knew I'd never see him again. In June, Claire came to visit. I didn't expect her. I was working in the garden, planting tomatoes, weeding the beds, when I heard a car pull up. I looked up and saw her stepping out of a sleek SUV, wearing designer jeans and a linen blouse, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She looked around at the cabin, at the clearing, at me in my dirt-stained work gloves. It's actually nice, she said, surprised. Thank you. Can I come in? I nodded. We sat at the kitchen table and I made tea. She looked around the interior, at the restored wood, the simple furniture, the small touches I'd added. Family photos on the mantel, books on the shelves, a vase of wildflowers on the table. I owe you an apology, Claire said finally. I didn't respond, just waited. I was wrong. About the inheritance, about Dad, about you. She took a breath. Margaret and I, we assumed Dad loved us more because he gave us more. But that wasn't it, was it? He loved you, I said quietly. He just knew you'd be okay without him. I needed more help. You didn't need help. You needed trust. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw tears behind her sunglasses. He trusted you, Josie, and you proved him right. You did something Margaret and I could never do. You gave up everything to do the right thing. I didn't give up everything. I kept what mattered. She looked around the cabin again, and for the first time, I saw something like understanding in her face. Can I come visit? Sometimes? Of course. Can I bring the kids? They should see this place. They should know their grandfather built it. I'd like that. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Dad would be proud of you, Josie. I smiled. I hope so. After she left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep purple. The air smelled of pine and earth and growing things. I thought about the bunker beneath my feet, still there, still holding a few treasures I'd kept. Not much, just enough. I thought about my father's letter, which I'd framed and hung on the wall above my bed, and I thought about the life I was building here. Small, quiet, true. I'd spent 51 years trying to be enough for other people. Now I was learning to be enough for myself. The stars came out, one by one, and I sat there in the darkness and felt, for the first time in my life, at peace. The end. My father's will left me only an old cabin at the top of the mountains. My sisters mocked me, but when I got there and opened the kitchen trap door, I found something that would change everything.